Hey everybody,
Howdy.
I'm Alex.
I'm Addison.
Addison. We're here today. We're going to show you some home cooking videos with stuff you just might have laying around. Today we're going to do some bolognese and some potato gnocchi.
Alright, let's get started.
Alright, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our ground beef here. This is about a pound of ground beef, and we're going to get that cooking in a nice hot pot.
A little bit of oil.
With a little bit of oil, and you want to cook all the liquid out of it and get it nice and browning.
Just enough to get the beef started. A lot of fat comes out of the beef while it's cooking. So you want just enough to where it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pot and burn. It's also really important to start this process with a very thick, heavy pot. We are going with a Dutch oven, Le Creuset style. It's important that it's thick so that way it retains a lot of heat but also doesn't burn things very easily.
The other things that you're going to need for bolognese is your traditional mirepoix, which is carrots, onions, and celery. We didn't have celery laying around today, so we're just going to use our carrots and onion. If you want to get that down to a small mince, if you're using a knife, or if you have a food processor or Robot-Coupe, that'll work just fine, and we'll show you that process. And then you'll need fresh tomatoes if you want, or canned tomatoes work fine as well, or a combination of both.
So right now I'm poking holes in the potatoes before we roast them, so that way it lets some of the steam come out of the potatoes. You want the potatoes to be as dry as possible when you're making the gnocchi. It lessens the chance of starch development in the potato, which yields a fluffier, just overall nicer gnocchi.
Alright, so here we're cooking off our ground beef, getting all that fat out and all the moisture. Just want to break it up so you're not making meatballs, and so it cooks evenly. We're getting some browning on there, and we just want to get all that fat and juices out of there, because we're going to take that, we're going to strain it from the meat itself and use that to cook down our vegetables.
So right now I'm just peeling the carrots before they get minced.
So to get your onions where you want them to be, you want to cut off your root end here. This part, it's all dirty and gross, you don't really want that. And then you can cut off your other end. That's going to go in your compost. You can cut that right in half. And you just want to get the very outside layer off. Maybe. Peeled, and since we're going to put ours into a Robot-Coupe or a food processor, we're just going to cut them down into more workable pieces here. And that's all you want to do. Alright, so now we have our ground beef. It's cooked and it's draining. You still want to use this pot, don't clean it out. It's still got some grease in there and all that nice crunchy bits, the fond, which will come into play later once we get the veggies in there. And we got our veggies right here cut. Just a rough chop. They don't have to be anything super small, just so the food processor will have a little bit of easier time going at it. Almost kind of like a paste, but just nice and small, so that way they cook nice and evenly and bring in all that good flavor. Alright, what are we doing here, Chef?
Alright, so we took the veg out of the food processor, and now we put it in the pot with all of the beef fat. All of the beef that was left on the side of the pot is now starting to come off because of the moisture of the veg. This is a really important part of the process because it develops flavor and wastes nothing. But what you want to do here is really focus on cooking down and really caramelizing all of the sugars in the mirepoix. We'll end up shrinking to about 2/3 this size. This takes a lot longer than you'd expect, about 20 minutes.
You also want to make sure that you keep your heat on a medium to low, You don't want to have it really high because that's not going to help you reduce slowly. It's just going to burn eventually if you have the heat too high. So that's why you also want to keep stirring it, but have it on a medium to low heat to really bring out the flavor slowly and get all the moisture cooked out without actually burning it.
I'm also using a wooden spoon because you can use the wooden spoon to scrape against the bottom of the pot in case anything sticks without actually scratching any of the metal off, but it's a little bit sturdier than a rubber spatula.
Alright, we're at a good halfway point for our veg. As you can see, a lot of the moisture is gone. We lost some color. On the side of the pan you can kind of see where it's starting to stick, which is good. You want to get that nice caramelization, that fond. That's just going to develop more flavor for your sauce. Alright, now that our sauce is rolling on low, we're going to cook down all that moisture that's going to come out. We're going to start working on our gnocchi. Addison here is getting all the potato off the skin. We cooked them at 450 degrees for about an hour. These are smaller potatoes, so depending on the size, you want to check them. Around an hour, they should be very soft, no hard spots. That's not going to help anything. You want to make sure that your potatoes are hot, your flour is ready. If your dough starts cooling off, it doesn't make as nice a dough. So you want to make sure you're working quickly when your potatoes come out. A couple things that you want to have when you're making gnocchi and a tammy, or just some kind of a food mill or something where you can kind of pass your potatoes through so they are easier to work with. Parchment paper and a dough scraper make really awesome gnocchi. Going, I think. All right, we're going to start by getting these potatoes pressed through our tammy here. You can use a plastic spatula to do this, or a plastic bench scraper like I have. If you have a food mill, this process will go a lot faster. Move it across the screen, get it pressed through. Just kind of catch if there's skin left on the potatoes. That's the same process as a food mill, do the same thing. And like I said before, you also want to make sure that you have your flour ready. I have about 3 cups kind of hanging out in a bowl. The trick with gnocchi is you just want to add enough flour till you get a consistent dough. You don't want to go too much or it'll be really dense. It shouldn't be. It should be a nice fluffy consistency for a dumpling.
So the idea behind cutting it as opposed to mixing it, I know there are some recipes that call to make it in a stand mixer, but the idea behind cutting it is so that way you don't have these really long starch and gluten strands, which will end up making really gummy gnocchi. You can also incorporate flour a little bit at a time without overdeveloping anything, but it is important to make sure that you add the flour before the dough gets too cold, because then the starch sets, and at that point it makes it just a weird consistency and not good. He's folding it over itself but not pressing it, he's just cutting the flour into it.
Alright, so we got our dough made. It should feel pretty light and malleable still. It shouldn't feel too stiff. It should be a little wet still, not too much, because you're going to add more flour to your work surface as you're rolling it out. So you just want to take a little bit at a time. A little flour. You just want to roll it out into the appropriate size that you want. That's pretty good. I'm just going to go ahead and cut them down to the size you want. And that's pretty much your gnocchi right there.
He used to roll gnocchi at Spruce in San Fran. Which is like a 1 Michelin star joint.
So we have our gnocchi all rolled out and ready to go. We're just gonna let that rest for a little bit here on the counter. Our bolognese sauce is rolling. It's simmering. See all that moisture that's gonna come out? You want all those tomatoes to cook down. You want to reduce a lot of that liquid. So we're gonna cover that back up, and then we have a pot going of water with a generous amount of salt so we can blanch our gnocchi. So we have our water is at a nice simmer. You don't want it to be a full raging boil. It's going to be a little too harsh, a little too hot on your gnocchi. So you just want it to be a nice simmer. We're going to drop that into the water, and we're going to wait. They're going to sink to the bottom, and then once they rise and are all floating, they're done. You can pull them out. You didn't see me do this, but I added a nice little layer of olive oil to the water so it kind of coats them when they come out. And then I have a pan over here that's already greased and ready to go, because as soon as they're done, you want to get them into a refrigerator or freezer to cool them down as soon as possible so they don't have that carryover cooking and they don't overcook and fall apart on you. You also want to touch them as little as possible with your hands because you don't want to ruin the shapes that you made. And you don't want to overcrowd your pan. So that's probably enough right there. I'm going to take a wooden spoon just to kind of separate them just a little bit. You want to be very gentle. That's all I'm going to do. And then we're just going to wait for that, for all those gnocchi to rise to the top, and they'll be done. And you want to have a strainer ready like this, and you can scoop them out and get them onto your greased pan. As you can already see, the smaller ones are already starting to float. This doesn't take too long, maybe a minute before they're all up, 30 seconds to a minute, and then you're just going to take them out and they'll be ready to go.
All right, so we're gonna finish the sauce here. Should be pretty simple. I'm gonna take a large handful of basil and just throw it on in there. I do not like to cook the basil with the sauce for the entirety of the time because I feel like the flavor gets lost. So I just try and add it at the very end and just gently cook the basil. And I like to leave it in large pieces, but if you like it to be smaller, that's totally fine. And we have also added a little bit of Parmesan rind to just add a little bit of the Parmesan flavor to the sauce. And then we will give it the old taste. And depending on how much salt you added while seasoning the mirepoix and everything beforehand is really going to determine how much salt it takes at the end. But for the most part, you shouldn't need to add too much to the sauce other than salt. So I'm just going to do it to taste here, add quite a bit. One thing for a lot of cooks that I will say is things take a lot more salt than you expect. So don't be afraid with the salt. You want it to be just right before it's too salty.
Alright, let's cook some pasta.
Yeah, are you recording right now?
Yeah?
Oh.
Gotta give them a comment.
Yeah, for real. I don't even... Okay, so we're going to finish the gnocchi bolognese here. We are just going to take a little bit of the sauce that we seasoned a little bit ago and put it in the pan. Make sure it's nice and hot. And we have our pre-blanched gnocchi. And we're just going to heat it up in the sauce, kind of toss it around, get it nice and coated. Keep it on the heat. You just want to make sure that the gnocchi are heated through in this process. Alright, so once the gnocchi has been heated all the way through, you're just going to do a quick finish. Got a bowl here. A little bit of the Parmesan cheese. You got the gnocchi. It's been